So, settled on the theme of lighthearted topics and also going into a foray of something that I've been wanting to talk about. I'm going to go ahead and talk about guilty pleasures. Now, guilty pleasures come in all shapes and sizes, and most people have their own definition of what a guilty pleasure is. Now, I'm going to talk about my top five guilty pleasures in music form. But I do want to touch on what a guilty pleasure is to me. And a guilty pleasure is basically a piece of art that lacks a lot of redeeming qualities, but remains entertaining. And there are quite a bit of those things for a lot of people. And there are quite a bit of ways in which people feel guilty about those kinds of things, but they shouldn't. Any form of entertainment is important and it should be important to you. I mean, I am honestly a fan of the Fast and Furious movies, despite the fact that it's been about 10 years since they made any kind of sense. But that's not what you watch those movies for. You watch those movies for a thrill ride. You watch those movies because they're not trying to be deep, introspective art. You watch those movies because they make you feel good. And there's something about it that even science can't seem to explain accurately. It's something that's intangible, and it's something that I think is really important because it's important to remember before I get started that a guilty pleasure is only guilty if you feel guilty about it. If it's entertaining, you should always enjoy it, and I'm always going to stick by that methodology and philosophy. So now, let's go ahead and talk about my top five guilty pleasures in music. And I'm going to count down from five to one. So, starting with number five, I'm here to say something that a lot of people on the internet probably wouldn't say, but here it goes. Shaquille O'Neal is not a terrible rapper. Honestly, he really isn't. I've heard in my lifetime at least 10 other people whose exclusive occupation is rapper that were demonstrably worse than Shaquille O'Neal. And I think a great way to showcase someone vouching for his talents and verifying that he definitely has something to offer in that realm. He did a remix of one of his most famous songs, which is no joke titled You Can't Stop the Rain, rain spelled as in reign of a king, Reign. Yeah, look it up. But there's a remix version of sorts that's done with the notorious B.I.G. when he was still alive, aka Biggie Smalls. And he was thought of as the best rapper in the world, and he offered his skills on one of his songs, Shaquille O'Neal songs, I mean. And that has to mean something. So for me, I've listened to a great deal of Shaquille O'Neal's material, and not only is that song a good representation that he's not the worst rapper by a wide margin, but that some of his music is actually worth listening to, for sure. So, number five, Shaquille O'Neal, not a bad rapper. Remember that. Now, on to number four. Now, number four is a little bit different. It's kind of behind my time, but I still saw the remnants of it in my lifetime, and I'm talking about disco. Now, for a lot of people who are on the internet, disco is well before their time, like myself. But they also saw the vestiges of it. And I can tell you right now, from what I've seen from the historical record, at least, disco was a wide reaching phenomenon and it was intense. But there was also a place where it kind of found its grounding that showcases why it was so great and why it became so popular. And for that, I look to a surprising source in many people's eyes, but I look to Motown Records. In the disco era, Motown Records made a lot of quality music, and I think it's best represented by the song, no joke, Love Machine by the Miracles. Now, I am not internet illiterate. I am well aware of the meme factor of that song. It precedes the internet, and it somehow got folded into it. But despite that, I would say listen to that song as a piece of music, and you'll find that it's pretty well done, and it's pretty well worth listening to, and it's a rewarding experience. And it also comes from an album that is grossly underrated, in my opinion. And I listened to the album where that song originated, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I would suggest other people do the same. So for me, mainly, I regard this as a guilty pleasure because of the specter of disco, but like any guilty pleasure, it doesn't stop me from enjoying it. And I tell people, if you look at the origins of disco and songs like Love Machine, you'll find that, well, disco became popular for a reason because a lot of it was just really plain good. That's more than I can say for number three, in which I know I'm truly going into guilty pleasure territory, but I am a child of the 90s for the most part. And what I remember most from the 90s was a heavy dose of Euro dance music. Yeah, dance music, specifically for dancing, that originated from European sources. And there were a lot of them, and boy, many of them were just empty headed fluff, the disco of its day of sorts. And a lot of it really was straightforward. It was very simple. It wasn't designed to be complex or artistically challenging. It was just designed to get you the dance. And for me, there's no better representative of this phenomena and the guilty pleasure dynamic behind it than Right Said Fred, I'm Too Sexy. Look, I am very much a music snob, but I will admit that that song hits a special place, like a lot of 90s Eurodance did. And I'm thankful that I listened to it, honestly. And it takes me back to a point in childhood where songs only had to be simple and direct in what they were to be entertaining. And I found that song entertaining despite what the public might have thought. Now, number two, though, is going even deeper into the fray. As a person who is well aware of what happens on the internet, I am also aware that Katy Perry does not have a very good reputation. But you know what? I cannot resist Katy Perry's first three albums. And by first three, I mean One of the Boys, Teenage Dream, and Prism. And for me, a great example of the guilty pleasure dynamic that fuels my what you would probably call affection for Katy Perry is her song Birthday from the album Prism. It was a single, it was pure guilty pleasure energy, and it's exactly what I liked about Katy Perry is that when she worked in that dynamic, it was reassuring. It was very much entertaining. I even like her song later that she did about the very phenomenon that that's the only thing she should do, which I don't agree with. But for me, Katy Perry's first three albums and the single Birthday are well worth listening to, whether it's a guilty pleasure or not. And that leads me to number one, which I don't even know if this is technically a guilty pleasure, but I am going to tell you why I think it is. But I gotta tell you, there was a time when Madonna was the biggest star in the world, and it was in the late 1980s. And a lot of the stuff she did from that time was really good and still appeals to me as a fan of music. Now, honestly, a lot of that material has gotten a critical reappraisal. But nonetheless, I remember the backlash that came with it at the time. I mean, rarely do people get to be the biggest star on the planet and not receive some level of backlash. Modern example, see Drake, the rapper, so to speak. But anyway, Madonna surely had a lot of good material from the late 80s that I really enjoyed. And in terms of guilty pleasure, there's no guiltier pleasure I feel than, surprise, surprise, a tie between two songs, Get Into the Groove and Material Girl. Now, look, I know what kind of energy comes with being a fan of Madonna and the legacy of it, but I just can't resist. The songs are really good, and she knows how to apply a pastiche, and she knows how to be a pop star, and she did it extremely well. And if you want to know the time period when Madonna was the biggest star in the world, listen to her material from that time period, and you'll surely discover why. So those are my top five guilty pleasures. Shaquille O'Neal, not a bad rapper at number five. Number four, disco was great, especially when Motown did it. Number three, yeah, Eurodance was kind of trashy, but it was fun. Two, Katy Perry is not as bad as people say she is. Listen to her first three albums, you'll hear it. And number one, yeah, I don't care what it means to love Madonna from the late 80s. I still do, and I always will. Now that's the show, everybody. Go ahead and like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment if you want and tell me what your guilty pleasures are or what conversations you might like to have about media or anything relevant in the social sphere. And remember, fear without the presence of danger is wholly illegitimate. So do not be afraid of something that is not a danger to you. Thank you very much for listening. Take care of yourself.